The starship Eclipse drifted silently through the void, its hull scarred from countless battles and its engines barely holding together. On board, Captain Elias Grant stood in the dimly lit cargo bay, staring at the alien woman who had just been brought aboard. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, tall with shimmering opalescent skin that seemed to refract the light, and eyes that glowed like twin moons. Her name was Zara'el, and she was the last of her kind. Zara'el had been found adrift in a damaged escape pod, her ship destroyed in a skirmish with the ruthless Kral'thar Empire. The Eclipse had picked up her distress signal, and against the better judgment of his crew, Elias had ordered her brought aboard. Now she stood before him, her regal demeanor shattered, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Please," she begged, her voice a haunting melody that echoed through the cargo bay. "You must help me. My people, they are gone. Extinct. The Kral'thar have wiped them out. I am the last. And if I cannot." Her voice broke, and she dropped to her knees, her hands clasped together in a gesture of desperation. Elias frowned, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had seen the devastation wrought by the Kral'thar, entire civilizations reduced to ash, their cultures erased from the galaxy. But he was just a human, a captain of a battered starship with a crew barely holding on. What could he possibly do to help her? "Zara'el," he said gently, crouching down to her level. "I'm sorry for what's happened to your people. But I don't understand. What do you need from me?" She looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. "Your laws," she said. "Your human laws. They are unique. If I marry a human, I can claim sanctuary under your species' protection. The Kral'thar cannot touch me if I am bound to a human. Please, Captain Grant, you must marry me. It is the only way I can survive." Elias blinked, taken aback by her request. Marry her. He had never even considered such a thing. He was a soldier, a man who had dedicated his life to the fight against the Kral'thar. Marriage had never been part of the plan. And yet, as he looked into her eyes, he saw the raw desperation, the flicker of hope that he might be her salvation. "Zara'el," he said slowly, "marriage it's a big commitment. It's not something humans take lightly. And I don't even know you. How can I?" "You do not have to love me," she interrupted, her voice pleading. "I do not ask for your heart, only your protection. Please, Captain. If you do not help me, the Kral'thar will find me. They will kill me, and my people will be lost forever. Cannot let that happen. I cannot let our legacy die with me." Elias sighed, running a hand through his hair. He glanced at his crew who had gathered around, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. They were all looking to him for guidance, for a decision. And as much as he wanted to turn her away, to tell her that he couldn't help her, he knew he couldn't. Not when she was so vulnerable, so alone. "All right," he said finally, his voice firm. "I'll do it. I'll marry you." Zara'el's eyes widened, and for the first time since she had come aboard, a faint smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. "Thank you, Captain Grant. You have given me hope." The ceremony was simple, held in the Eclipse's mess hall with the crew as witnesses. There were no flowers, no music, no grand speeches. Just a few words spoken by the ship's medic, who had been ordained in some obscure religion years ago. Elias stood awkwardly beside Zara'el, his hands clasped in hers, as the medic pronounced them husband and wife. Felt surreal, like something out of a dream. Elias had never imagined he would marry an alien, let alone under such circumstances. And yet, as he looked at Zara'el, He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of responsibility, of duty. She was his now, and he would do whatever it took to protect her. The days that followed were tense. The Kral'thar were relentless, and it wasn't long before they caught wind of Zara'el's survival. The Eclipse was pursued across the galaxy, its crew pushed to their limits as they fought to stay one step ahead of their enemies. Through it all, Zara'el remained by Elias's side. Her presence a constant reminder of the promise he had made. At first, their relationship was purely practical. They spoke little, their interactions limited to the necessities of survival. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to change. Elias found himself drawn to her quiet strength, her resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. And Zara'el in turn began to open up to him, sharing stories of her people, their culture, their history. One night, as they sat together in the ship's observation deck, staring out at the stars, Zara'el turned to him and said, "Thank you, Elias, for everything. I know this was not what you wanted, but you have given me a chance to live, to carry on my people's legacy. I will never forget that." Elias looked at her, his heart swelling with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I made a promise, and I intend to keep it, no matter what." She smiled, a genuine radiant smile that lit up her entire face. And in that moment, Elias realized that he didn't just see her as someone he needed to protect. He saw her as someone he cared about, someone he wanted to be with. Not out of obligation but out of choice. The final confrontation with the Kral'thar came sooner than anyone expected. The Eclipse was cornered in a remote sector of the galaxy, its engines failing, its weapons depleted. The Kral'thar flagship loomed before them, a monstrous vessel bristling with weapons. There was no escape. Elias stood on the bridge, his hand gripping the armrest of his chair as he stared at the viewscreen. "This is it," he said quietly. "We're not getting out of this one." Zara'el stepped forward, her expression calm, resolute. "Then we face it together," she said. "As husband and wife." Elias nodded, his heart heavy but determined. He reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining. "Together," he agreed. The Kral'thar attacked with everything they had, their weapons tearing through the Eclipse's hull. The ship shuddered, alarms blaring as the crew fought to keep it together. But it was no use. The Eclipse was doomed. As the ship began to break apart, Elias turned to Zara'el, pulling her into his arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I couldn't protect you." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. "You did," she said. "You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to keep fighting. And for that, I will always be grateful." The ship exploded in a blinding flash of light, its remains scattering across the void. And in that final moment, as the stars swallowed them whole, Elias and Zara'el held each other, their bond unbroken, their love eternal. In the years that followed, the story of the Eclipse and its brave crew became legend. The tale of a human captain who married an alien woman to save her from extinction, who stood by her side until the very end, inspired countless others to fight against the darkness. And though they were gone, their legacy lived on, a beacon of hope in a galaxy torn apart by war. For Elias and Zara'el, it was not the ending they had hoped for. But in each other they had found something worth fighting for. And in the end that was enough.